Welcome back. Today's going to be a fun one. And I say that because just before we all broke for the holidays, player numbers for Total War Shogun 2 had surged by 34%, right? It had a year of its monthly peak players being around 3,200, and then suddenly that went up to 5,200. Now you might think, oh, has Creative Assembly done some marketing, added some content? The answer is no. It's the opposite. It's a number of people, I'd say most notably Legend of Total War, making a change in their content. One that is leading to different player patterns, one that shows that actually a lot of the players do not need Creative Assembly anymore. You see, here's the thing, right? Sometimes a whole gameplay genre ends up being essentially held by a single studio. You know, The Sims, Battlefield, Total War, kind of inseparable from their studios in the minds of audiences. Now, Creative Assembly are obviously trying to win people back. They did a whole announcement about that, a price drop with refunds for Pharaoh, amended DLC plans for Warhammer that do genuinely look quite a bit better, and as a lifelong fan of Total War games, I wish them the best. I hope it works. I don't want them to face layoffs and all of these things that could make these games so much worse, or essentially mean that they're just, squeezing out the last drops of juice before the whole thing blows up. Now here's the problem. For this very long time, they've been going for short-term profit, essentially turning large DLCs into these things called saga games, like, of course, Thrones of Britannia and Total War Attila. And then we got to the stage where we had Troy, which was spun out of Warhammer, then having Pharaoh spun out of it, and, they tried to make that be the full price, like a full historical Total War game, which it obviously wouldn't. That's the kind of short-term thinking that got them into this situation. And it's great that they're trying to climb their way out of it now, but what if they're actually playing the wrong game? What if the reality that is actually backed up by player numbers basically runs against their current business model? What if they're actually being killed by competition? Competition that isn't Paradox Interactive, although they certainly are competitive. No, competition that is their past selves, their own community, and now even their ex-community. Let's dive in, and if you want to support what we're doing in this channel, check out bellular.ghost.io in that link down below. We're actually going to have a new URL soon, but that's where you can get Loading Screen, which is our daily publication for all the gaming news, as well as so much other content, and of course, well, you get videos there early, you get them ad-free, and you support what we are doing, which we massively appreciate. So, thank you to everybody there. Check the link down below, and let's roll. Creative Assembly's first enemy is themselves in the past. Let's dive into this. So right now you are looking at this screenshot, which is the Total War franchise sorted by 24-hour peak players. I took this screenshot on Sunday morning, meaning that for EU and NA, it actually means that Saturday night peak players are being counted. You'll notice the Three Kingdoms is really large in that screenshot. That's of course because of time zones. The Three Kingdoms is far more played over in China than it is over in the West. Now, note that Pharaoh is pretty damn low on this. Now, the next thing you're looking at is the launch of Pharaoh, where Pharaoh, when it launched, was behind Rome 2. Now, Pharaoh's 24-hour peak is 698 players. That is its peak on Saturday night, close to the game's launch. Now, I've covered why Pharaoh ended up basically being a bit of a miss. It was as high effort as Creative Assembly Sophia could. It was as high effort, but it was fundamentally a bit of a reskin of Troy. It flopped, again, in spite of the developers' valiant efforts, and we don't really need to talk about that again. The pattern that I want you to notice is Rome 2 and Medieval 2. And also, that's why I actually opened today by talking about the rise of Shogun 2. And that's why we need to talk about Legend of Total War. So, a historical rally. Here you can see just a quick screenshot of the Social Blade stats for the channel, basically just monthly video views. You can see they were flatlining for a while, but then the previous 30 days, that has actually spiked up for his channel. Now, there's an August spike that you can see all the way back in 2022. That corresponds to the launch of Immortal Empires for Warhammer 3. Makes a lot of sense.
As for this recent surge, you would maybe think this recent surge is all to do with the drama. In a way it is, but no. Actually, the recent surge is a second-order effect of the drama because the drama got him to not really make that many Warhammer 3 videos and instead start making historical videos. Here's a big screenshot of the channel's uploads, and you can see it is almost all historical content, right? Now, at the very bottom here, you see a video called Banned that got a load of views, right? Thing is, that was published towards the end of October, so at least in decent part, it doesn't actually count towards that very large viewership spike. And as the man himself said, what's happened on his channel is he's getting bored of Warhammer 3, obviously with Shadows of Change and all of that, and the patch being seemingly quite late, didn't feel like covering Warhammer 3 as much, so he started doing some of the historical games that he does happen to enjoy. And as he said, the historical content has started to pop off. However, let's look closer at this again. If you tally these up, you see, I believe, 15 videos on Shogun 2, either base Shogun 2 or Fall of the Samurai. Now, Shogun 2 has actually surged in Steam. It surged, as I said at the top of the video, by 34%. And part of that, while other people have covered the game, it's mainly him in terms of view count, and it does seem that that is at least correlating. I am sure that it's maybe growing anyway as people are checking out back catalog games because they're not happy about the current state of the franchise, but certainly the social drive from his channel will have actually played a role in this. And in a way, this is a problem for Creative Assembly. Look, more people finding Shogun 2, that's pretty great, but let's think about how CA actually make money, and then let's apply that to how people are actually playing their video games. Now, I'll do the games in order of player base. Warhammer 3, yep, that is a well-monetized game. It has loads of DLC that, of course, they are getting a lot of hot water for trying to increase the price of. Three Kingdoms, well, it does have DLC, and it doesn't have a tiny RRP. However, it has no further DLC because the attachment rate of the DLC that they did in the Chinese market wasn't as high as they wished. And a source told me that the follow-up game that they were going to do instead of doing more Three Kingdoms DLC, that game has been cancelled. Essentially, it seems that they got amazing sales for Three Kingdoms, but really bad DLC attachments. So they likely then thought, okay, well, we'll do another game set in and around this era instead of doing more DLC, because clearly they buy the video games, but not the DLC. It's kind of rough. Rome 2. No further DLC is being made. Medieval 2, no further DLC is being made. Shogun 2, no DLC. Empire, no more DLC. Napoleon, no more DLC. Attila, no more DLC. Now, those games all do have DLC. Many of them are actually worth picking up. Indeed, there are some great ones that Creative Assembly Sophia actually worked on, I believe, for Rome 2 Empire or Emperor Edition. But to keep on going down the list, you've got Rome Remastered. Now, that in a way is good for Creative Assembly. I think Rome Remastered is pretty damn great, and it sells for a higher RRP than Rome does, so that's really good for them. Below that, you've got Rome 1, which obviously has no further DLC, and then Pharaoh, Thrones, and Troy, which are basically, outside of Three Kingdoms, their three most recent historical games. Remember, this franchise was built off historical games, and currently, outside of Warhammer 3, it is historical games that are just, by the way, A, ancient, and B, still just being played a hell of a lot. Again, Pharaoh, yes, it's getting more players than Thrones and Troy, but Pharaoh has sold awfully. And if Three Kingdoms is anything to go by, they're probably not going to invest in a bunch of DLC development for it. Now remember that the Saga games were essentially Creative Assembly's attempt to get more Total War releases. Obviously, they wanted yearly Total Wars between Warhammer, between historical, and essentially things like, say, Barbarian Invasion that maybe in the past would have just been a DLC. A large DLC, a sort of expansion, those are kind of being nipped off and then turned into these Saga games. I believe Thrones of Britannia was largely forked from Attila. Then I think, was it Warhammer 1 or Warhammer 2 that Troy then forked off, and I believe Pharaoh is forking off Troy, though that is off the top of my head. Still, I think you very much do understand the point there. And by the way, they've started to call Fall of the Samurai a Saga game, but that is something completely done retrospectively. What it is basically either the or one of the best expansions that company has ever made, and I will also chime in, Shogun 2 and Fall of the Samurai, those are pretty much like within my top 3, my top 2 perhaps in the Total War franchise. You should absolutely check them out because they are goddamn awesome. Now, here's the learning, right? What is this company actually doing? Right now, they're floundering about trying to make Warhammer work, but when you look at their successes, you really find out that they are, or they should be in the business of making 10,000 hour video games, near infinitely replayable ones that essentially are massive sandboxes that can be added to with more DLC, like Paradox have been able to do with Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, Stellaris, City Skylines, or even like with Electronic Arts and The Sims. Now the thing is, they have achieved this. They've achieved it with Warhammer, but in a way, they didn't really understand why. Because Total War Warhammer would have maybe been a 10-year-long video game or an 8-year-long video game if it was being done by Paradox, much like how Paradox released Stellaris. Was that 2016? They released it ages ago, and they just kept on making expansion pack, expansion pack, expansion pack, just like what they did for Crusader Kings. Instead, what Creative Assembly did, well, they wanted their full-priced big box releases that were centered around these campaigns. And a perfect example here is that the true value of Warhammer 3 was like Immortal Empires. Again, you know, why did Legend of Total War's stuff spike that much up to just shy of 8 million views a month? It was because of Immortal Empires, because what Immortal Empires did is it transformed that into the full, ultimate, you could say, Total War Warhammer platform that merged all the factions, all the DLCs, everything that people had bought, just like what people get from, say, Crusader Kings-like experience. And while it is not in the most healthy state right now, you do just have to see it is at the top of those charts. And the hilarious thing is, so this is what I did. I added up all of the 24-hour peaks, and you can see there that the peak franchise concurrency in the last 24 hours, as of me taking my screenshot on Sunday morning, was 74,000 players. So they have 74,000 peak players within a 24-hour period, and only 1/3 of those are on a well-monetized platform, Warhammer. Because yes, well, people maybe will buy a Rome 2 DLC or something like that. We all know that, number one, those aren't like costing as much. People have been able to pick them up on very deep discounts, and you know, they're not the new stuff that is better monetized like Warhammer. So imagine that you have 74,000 players playing your games, potentially even concurrently, yet only 1/3 are doing that on a game that you are actively monetizing, and the other 2/3, they may have bought that game 5 or 10 years ago, and they are still playing it, and you are earning nothing. We, of course, have learned a lot from this then. Number one, the old games have massive replayability aided by mods. Number two, players want broad, historical period sandbox games that they can play just like Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron. That is the sort of game that they should really be modeling off, not this trying to force having loads of box releases all of the time. What they want to do is work out how to make a decade game and then continue supporting it so that they can fully leverage the very healthy long-term concurrency that they've been able to get from their games. And then we've also learned that expansions spun off into DLCs just doesn't really work. Troy, you can have a few fun campaigns in, and I think the same is actually true of Pharaoh as well, but that's actually not really what people seem to be looking for. People don't seem to be looking for a few interesting campaigns. People seem to be looking for a massive 1,000, 5,000, whatever it is, hour sandbox. Ultimately, whenever Pharaoh dropped the Saga branding and it increased its price to that of a full video game, guess what happened? Everyone realized that they were just being confronted with shrinkflation. But that's not actually all. Let's talk about a community unleashed. Creative Assembly Studio Director said this about the addition of Steam Workshop in Fall of the Samurai, I believe, to PC Gamer. "We should be letting people do this. There's no philosophical problem with modding at all. I can imagine situations where it might run into trouble if someone started to do a mod that happened to be the thing we were doing in the next game, then we'd be thinking, do we really want to encourage that?" He added for a laugh. But broadly, they were pretty pro-modding, and again, in and around the time of Fall of the Samurai, you can really see that. Now, unfortunately, full campaign map tools they did not exist for the likes of Napoleon, Empire, stuff like that, which is why you don't really see as many big crazy mods as you did for, say, Medieval 2. That being said, I believe there are campaign map tools that have been created for Attila, and that is what is leading to some extremely cool things happening in the realms of Middle-earth. More on that later. Point basically is, this kind of isn't how things ended up playing out. What's actually happened is, modders have kept unmonetized platforms alive to the point where the unmonetized games are more compelling to people than the new monetized games. Creative Assembly, via its Saga titles, has not been able to entice people away from the games that they have been playing, either in their stock state or bolstered by mods, and I will talk about some amazing mods later on in today's video, so at least you can come away from this with a bit of a reading list of things that you can check out. Now, if modders are making it so that old Total War games can very much compete with new Total War games, what happens when those modders get pissed off, leave, and start actually doing video games? And that is where we have to talk about Ultimate Development, or should I say Ultimate General. So, Ultimate General American Revolution has entered early access. Game Labs, the studio, are basically on their path to make Total War-like games. Now, if you are wanting to focus on that kind of thing, how about you go straight to the people who actually have been making bits of Total War games that people have vocally supported? You know, modders. And in this case, one of the most prolific Total War modders had just stepped away. That guy is Nick, also known as Darth Vader, who's the creator of the Darth mods, which are some of the biggest and most popular mods that have existed for Total War. I mean, Empire Darth mod, for so many people, that fixed Empire and made it into an amazing experience, where even though I would say Napoleon is a better video game than Empire, you regularly do see that Empire just has more concurrent players on Steam. Now, he did end up admitting that in this 2017 interview with Game Developer that maybe his own actions in the community were instrumental for Creative Assembly not really wanting him to be about. Basically, this is what he said. Quote, "There is something that I'd really like to forget. Creative Assembly is a large company with many employees whose products reach millions. Modders then were having significant influence on the players' community. I was one of the most popular, and due to being very passionate about Total War games, I often overreacted and spread negativity about things I considered wrong. I tried to help, but in an exaggerated and probably wrong way. They had every right not to accept me, but I grew up. Now I try to remember only the positive moments, the fun I had modding their games." So, of course, introspection, all of that, very good. We're all pro introspection. It is interesting, though, that, he was talking about, okay, maybe he went too far, maybe he overreacted. However, things that were not good for players. And I suppose the Creative Assembly, maybe if they had have listened to some of those critiques in years gone by, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in right now. So to actually touch on video games then, we've got Ultimate General Gettysburg, which I believe that actually came out on mobile first, because I remember playing it on an iPad, a really big iPad Pro, the original version that you could basically kill someone with. And to be honest with you, the whole dragging people about, it did kind of feel like you were having this generalship, at the war table fantasy. And then there was also Ultimate General American Civil War. So these were initially successful titles, but what has changed now, of course, is their new game, which, I've seen plenty of videos about, and certainly Ultimate General American Revolution looks fairly damn incredible, and in a way it does go back to things that he's worked on in the past. Empire, which did have the American Revolution as a part of it. What's really fascinating about the game, though, is you can see the Total War inspirations, yes, but also it's playing out in a real-time like overall management layer, a bit more like a Paradox game. That is fairly interesting. Then I think when you actually look down to the combat model, number one, looks great. Number two, I wonder, if they're going for a bit less of that super granular spectacle that led Total War in, basically, right, the Warscape engine games, their flaws were not as apparent in the earlier ones because they didn't involve as much melee combat. But just stuff with unit cohesion, it wasn't really as great in the later Warscape engine games. So I would imagine with the way that they're kind of going in this, that will be fairly good. Anyway, point is, that game is getting buzz. Now we're actually seeing some more genuine competition. What if Paradox was to do anything like this? As an example, I've actually forgotten, I think is it Europa Universalis? I think that's the one where you can actually, it's a mod that hands off from Europa Universalis so that you can do your combat in the engine, like you can do your combat basically in Napoleon Total War, and then that will carry back to the campaign map in EU. It might be EU, it might be another one, I forget exactly, but for many people, that is somewhat of a dream. So who knows? If Paradox was to make it happen, I think they would be in a genuine place to actually disrupt. I mean, if they were to do a spin-off of Crusader Kings that was more Total War-like in its, real-time combat, you could definitely see a lot of people actually be taken over. The question is, will they be able to afford a project of that scope? Because certainly the costs of making games have went up since Medieval 2. Now, I want to talk about some mods here. There's a really big highlight that I want to do because it's the mod that personally I'm going to play next, and it is RTR Imperium Surrectum. And just to give you a taste of what this mod for Rome Remastered does, one of their most recent releases was basically like in and around Greece. 100 plus newly remastered units for Greek Hellenistic and Thracian units. A region map of 1,808 regions. You can basically have a whole game to yourself just in Greece or just in Rome. It is stunning. 54 playable factions, 50 that are not playable currently. They've redesigned like religion, new unit recruitment system, a massive amount of like actual amazing attention to detail, things in the combat model that are great, but also like historical authenticity. It is a truly mind-boggling project. And of course, Rome 1 is that was the Creative Assembly title that first took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of my hours. So to me, this is perfect, but I do want to just leave you with some notable mods to check out. So, Divide et Impera for Rome 2. Basically, if you, like me, thought that Rome 2 went way too arcadey, that it was way too fast, and just that it felt like it was lacking a lot of depth, DEI is the mod to check out. Then, for Medieval 2, Divide and Conquer is awesome. Stainless Steel is also another classic for Medieval 2, as well as Europa Barbarum 2. Very awesome. Now, for Attila, we've got Dawnless Days. I just want to highlight that because I believe it is the big, I think it's like the big Middle-earth project that people are very excited about, where it does actually appear that they've been able to somehow get a campaign map going in Attila, which is very awesome. For Empire, I would of course call out Darth Mod, and then also for Attila, Medieval Kingdoms 1212 AD, which basically, if you've wanted Medieval 3, which Steam stats do suggest many people want, that is the closest you can get to it. And with that, between older Creative Assembly games, between what modders are doing, and then between what other companies like Paradox, and then sometimes also spurred on by modders, that basically is the three main threats to Creative Assembly, who right now have lost community goodwill. They have about a third of their concurrent players playing on a game platform that, I say platform when I talk about these games because really their business model should be a lot closer to Crusader Kings or something like that. Only a third are playing on a currently well-monetized one. They have basically strategically messed up. And to be honest with you, Creative Assembly, who make grand strategy games, sort of failing in strategy because of a lot of short-termism. Geez, come on. Learn the lessons of your own art. All right, that's it for today's video. I'll see you next time.